When I first shipped out for the West Indies, the Ark hadn't been thought of. Sailors chose their own time to leave, and nobody inspected their yachts. The odds on any sort of certificate of competence were long. But we read the pilot books, gleaned further information from classic cruising accounts, then stocked up and stood out boldly for the horizon. A number of items considered critical on today's boats didn't feature on the average inventory a generation back. For most people, refrigeration still lay in the future, and navigation by the sun and the stars was universal. What you've never had you don't miss, however, so cruising around only dimly aware of one's position wasn't too much of a hardship. It's more interesting that many of the current safety must-haves were also largely absent. There was a notable shortage of life rafts among the general run of ocean wallopers in 1975, and long-range two-way radio was certainly not something anybody took for granted. Unless you are one of the few, this concentrated the mind starkly. When Blondie Hasler, a competitor in the first Observer single-handed transatlantic race, was asked what would befall him if his yacht were to come to insurmountable grief in mid-ocean, with no help in sight, he famously replied, "I am resolved to drown like a gentleman." Which brings us to the bottom line of this column. Self-sufficiency at sea, based on the outdated assumption that we can't expect someone else to dig us out when our day turns pear-shaped. Things may have changed generally for the better, but if we continue to operate on the basis that we're on our own out there, it'll be no bad thing. I can testify personally that anyone with a will to live setting out in an old wooden boat has always done their damnedest to make sure she's well up together. Real safety lies not in needing a life raft in the first place, so seams are tightly corked and stopping is fresh and supple. There'll be some record of the condition of the keel boats, and the galvanised rigging will have been tooth-combed for rust. Having done all this and a great deal more, lockers are then stocked with oakum, pitch, plywood and fastenings, as well as the usual starter motor, injector, O-rings, toilet rebuild kit, and every spare imaginable. On my boats, I also dedicated a section of the bilge to hoarded boatyard debris. This junk zone was crammed with selected rubbish I'd picked up lying around in the dirt and poking out of skips. Someone's busted pump, a canvas bag of giant nuts, bolts and washers, a few bulldog grips, a metre-long length of threaded rod, the guts of an old windlass, a large iron wrecking bar, a sheet of rolled-up lead. There was no end to it, and keeping it made complete sense. In the first place, the extra weight down low eased the boat's motion. More importantly, when an unexpected failure comes crashing along in mid-ocean, as keeps on happening in the real world, if I had no official spare, there always seemed to be something in the hoard below the boards with which I could cobble up a result. "Snapped off gooseneck, sir," says the ghost of the ancient yard foreman you wish was there with you. "Bit of the old metal fatigue, is it? No problem. Just heat up this antique bottle screw with your gas torch and bend it over a bit. It won't pass the Concours d'Elegance, but it'll see you home." Of course, the toolkit was comprehensive as well, for the simple reason that there was no deep-sea AA to call if you'd forgotten the lump hammer. I found myself in a different world recently as I sat at the chart table of a 70-foot state-of-the-art fast cruiser shortly before dawn. My shipmates and I were bound for the Caribbean on what used to be called the Milk Run down the Trades from the Canaries. By ocean passage standards, this is one of the less challenging when tackled at the right time of year. If we'd any doubts on that score, we could set them at rest. It turned out we were crossing at the same time as the Ark Fleet, who, we like to hope, were getting it right. Although we weren't part of their show, we knew they were around, because we could hear them on the radio. As the big yacht hissed almost silently through the night at 9 or 10 knots, no lights disturbed the clear horizon, and the nearest AIS contact was 10 miles ahead. I was overtaking it, but it was well out on the weather bow, and I'd written it off my mental list of concerns, which, on this peaceful watch, were largely non-existent. Through the pilot-house door I could see Cassiopeia rising companionably astern. Scorpio reached up like a whip from the southern horizon, and I was improving my mind with a page of Catch-22 before nipping up on deck for a look round, when the VHF burst into life. Of all things, it began spewing out a Mayday. I almost jumped out of my team polo shirt as the data reeled off in true blue textbook fashion. None of your "help, I'm sinking" stuff here. Whoever was broadcasting had been to school and knew how to call for assistance. As the lat long position crackled through, I whizzed the cursor across my plotter screen until it coincided with the numbers. By the time the operator got to the bit about "we are taking on water," my crosshairs had dropped cleanly over my AAS contact, which I noted had now lost way. I flipped on the radar overlay, and there she was, nicely fixed, an hour away at most, downwind, on a broad reach. When the message ended, I sat out the usual unofficial 10-second wait to see if anyone more competent to assist than me came on the air. Nobody did, so I called back with the good news that we'd be with them in 1 hour maximum. Could they hold on till then? Yes, they said, if things remained as they were. That wasn't going to be a problem. I turned out the hands, briefed them, trimmed the sheets, and away we went at our standard 9 knots on course for the casualty. We communicated as we ran down to her, and it turned out she was an ARC participant. Her problem was that her stern shaft coupling seemed to have come adrift. The shaft had shunted aft some distance, but had not fallen out. She was making water, but no more than her pumps could comfortably deal with. Thinking of some of the dire scenarios I'd had to live through in the days before universal radios on yachts, I had to wonder what the distress call was all about. As I understood it, a mayday was supposed to be a life-threatening emergency. But we pressed on like knights in shining oilskins, keen to serve. We hove to at sunrise, a few boats' lengths to windward of the yacht in distress. She was a ketch of around 45 feet. Her crew were all perched up in the midships cockpit, waving. The upshot of the next VHF exchange was that they didn't know how to remake the coupling connection. But the owner of my boat was an engineer who understood these matters in depth. I handed the mic to him. He talked them through what they must do, then quizzed them about their toolkit. They had nothing that would address certain aspects of the issue. The tools required were not obscure, and it was no surprise to discover that we had all they needed and more. We packed the spanners in a Tupperware container, tossed in a set of Allen keys, attached the waterproof package to an old fender, and floated it down to them on a lightweight line. They grabbed it, and we stood by while they followed instructions. By breakfast, they were sorted. Mayday over, radios back on standby, and us herring westwards towards the islands with our poles squared and bacon from the fridge sizzling in the galley. I make no judgment about this incident. There but for the grace of God, etc. But remembering Blondie Hasler, you just have to wonder, don't you?